Well, Merry Christmas, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Christmas Sunday and this online service. We hope that this has been a great season for you. And on behalf of the whole Washington Heights staff, let me just say one more time, Merry Christmas. And as we begin our online service today, we're going to start with some music. Sing along if you know it, or just take it in. And then I'll be back to share a few words and a message today. And thank you for joining us.
That he paid. Oh, sing hallelujah, sing hallelujah, sing hallelujah for the things he has done. Come and adore him, bow down before him, sing hallelujah to the light of the world. Down before him, sing hallelujah to the light of the world. You're the light of the Children weep no more. Hope is on the horizon. A weary world behold your promised Messiah. Angels, let your song begin.
Christ is born in Bethlehem. Here comes heaven. No sinner wait no more. Love has broken the silence. And come let us adore. The Savior is with us. Angels, let your song begin. Here comes heaven. Christ is born in Bethlehem. Here comes heaven. Here comes heaven. Well, now behold His glory, glory in the highest. All the earth rejoice, for Christ is born. Well, now behold His glory, glory in the highest. All the earth rejoice, for Christ is born. Over all who mourn breaks the dawn of salvation, and darkness reigns no more. For Jesus is greater. He is greater. Angels, let your song begin. Here comes heaven. Christ is born in Bethlehem. Here comes heaven. Angels, let your song begin. Here comes heaven. All creation worship Him. Here comes heaven. Here comes heaven. Oh, come, let us adore Him. Oh, come, let us adore Him. Oh, come, let us adore Him, Christ the Lord. Oh, come, let us adore Him. Oh, come, let us adore Him. Oh, come, let us adore Him, Christ the Lord.
Well, we thank our team for leading us in some music to focus us here on this Christmas day. And I want to share a few words with you that come out of the Christmas story, one particular part of it. And let me start with a question. Have you ever taken a journey, a trip, and found that it was worth it? It was worth the trip and everything that comes along with it? And my guess is you've also taken a journey here or there that has not been worth the trip and all the effort that was involved. Well, today I want to spend a little time in the story of what we often call the three wise men, those Magi, and they made a long journey to go and find Jesus. And as we're talking about the wise men, we thought it would be a good idea to ask some of our young folks at Washington Heights Church some questions about the wise men to see what they know about the story. Check this out.
They were three kings, and they were from the land of Persia.
They were three wise men who went to go see Jesus.
He went saw Jesus while he was baby.
I have no clue.
They're the one who gave Jesus stuff. And ghosts.
They went to see Jesus.
They went to see Jesus.
Land of Persia.
They were from the Middle East, I think.
From Jesus.
I have no clue.
The Bible. Higher Mayo.
Bethlehem.
I think they lived by Jesus.
Three.
God.
Probably about like 50 or 100.
3. Fleece.
2,000.
I just don't know. 100.
Whatever you want to call them.
I have no idea.
What were their ages?
Bob, Jeff, and Jeffrey.
Jingle and jingle bells. 8s, 2s, and 8s.
Chris, Tracy, and Gideon.
Superman, Spider-Man, Batman.
And our kids are awesome, aren't they? And I think they did pretty well. But I want to jump into this story about the wise men because, there are a lot of different ideas around that. And I don't know if you know this or not, but when we have our nativity scenes set up around Christmas time, we kind of jumble it all together. The wise men actually weren't there at Jesus' birth. It tells us that they came probably when Jesus was about a toddler, was a year to 2 years after his birth. But it's okay, the way that we set up our nativities, but it really doesn't change really the question that we're looking at today. Is the journey worth it? And faith is often a journey. And I don't know where you are today and why you're joining us. Maybe you're sitting there and you're watching this and somebody turned it on and you had to watch it. And that's part of my experience as well. I like to say when I was a kid, I had a drug problem. I got drugged to church all the time and I had to go because my parents said, you need to go. And maybe that's where you are today, but I'm glad that you're there. Maybe you've been, kind of wondering, or you've been with us for a while at Washington Heights and you're saying, I think there might be something in this Jesus thing that is there for me and faith has something, but you're not sure what it is. Glad you're with us today. Maybe this year, 2022, has been a real difficult year for you, and you're looking maybe just for a ray of hope here in this Christmas season. Glad you're here. Maybe you've been journeying with Jesus for a long time, and maybe the story is very familiar to you, and I hope that maybe there's a little bit of something new that comes out of this story for you, and I'm glad that you're with us as well. So who were these wise men? It tells us in Matthew chapter 2 that after Jesus' birth, some wise men came from the east, and we don't know exactly where they came from. We do know that they were people who were kind of overseeing a lot of areas, fields of study, as we would call it, astronomy, astrology, sciences, and math, and all of that. And we often, say that there were three, but we don't know that. We get three because of the three gifts that they're going to bring, gold and frankincense and myrrh. But in all likelihood, there were a whole bunch of them, that it was a whole entourage, that it was a whole caravan of people that showed up. There could have been dozens of them. There could have been hundreds of them. And when they show up in Jerusalem, it's like a spectacle. It's not like a couple people walking down the streets. This would have been common knowledge because it was such a big deal. And they show up in Jerusalem and they ask this question in Matthew chapter 2, verse 2. They say, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We have come to worship him." And it's an interesting thing that they get to that point in understanding that some important birth has taken place, because where they come from is several hundred miles away. How did they even know? So as I mentioned, these are astronomers, they're searching the night sky, and there's this star that they follow that comes there. But it even raises the question, how did they even know about that? And how did that lead them ultimately to Jerusalem? And there are a lot of different ideas about that, even what the star is. Was it a meteor? Was it something unusual? Was it God's glory that was, just made visible in a very real way? And, a lot of different ideas. We can't really nail that down. But here's something that I think we do know, and this is my own take on how they were even looking for a star and how it led them to Jerusalem. Hundreds of years before they showed up, in part of the Old Testament, the nation of Babylon comes against Israel. And the king, Nebuchadnezzar, he conquers people, and he has this interesting foreign policy. He goes and takes some of the best, the young and the brightest, and removes them from their culture, brings them into his culture, and really immerses them in that and seeks to gain from their wisdom to make his own culture stronger and better and more informed. I think it's just a brilliant move. Well, back in an Old Testament book called Daniel, there's some of those young men who were taken, Daniel being obviously the one after whom that book is named. And he spends time in Babylon, and he eventually is blessed by God in all kinds of ways, and he moves up through the ranks, and eventually he is given responsibility over a portion of the kingdom and over some of the people, and that includes Magi, these people that are described in this story. And so I believe hundreds of years before this story takes place, Daniel and some of his friends sit down with some of these wise men in Babylon, and they share some of what God has revealed to them. And there's a verse way back in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, the second part of it, and it predicts that one day a star will rise out of Jacob. Jacob was another name for Israel. And so could it be that there was a group of people who for hundreds of years has known, you know what, one day something unusual is going to happen in the stars and we need to be alert to it. That's my belief of how they get to where they are. And they even make the connection that, this is in Israel. What's the capital of Israel? Jerusalem. So when they see something in the sky, they follow that and they go to Jerusalem. And when they show up, no doubt, it makes, kind of a big splash. And here's my guess too, when they show up and they ask that question in Matthew chapter 2, verse 2, hey, where's the newborn King of the Jews? A lot of the people would probably say, shh, don't, talk so loud. Here's why. Because a guy named Herod is in charge in Jerusalem. And I don't know what you know about Herod. He was a brilliant man in some respects, built some things that are still there, and we're able to see them in Israel today. But he was also a very insecure guy and downright evil in a couple of different ways. By this point in the story, Herod has killed a wife, 2 biological sons, and his mother-in-law. So this is a guy not to be messed with, a guy who will fight to defend his own position. And when they show up, people that probably are a little bit nervous about, hey, don't cause a ruckus here. We know that Herod can go off, and we don't want him to go off on us, and you would probably be better served by not making a big deal out of this. But they go eventually and they find Herod and they find some of his experts around him and they ask that question. And Herod's playing kind of both sides of the coin. He seems interested in it, but he's really not interested in it. He just wants to get information that's going to help him keep his position. So he brings in some experts in what we would call the Old Testament. And they say, hey, where is this newborn King of the Jews? Where's he supposed to be born? And you know what the experts do? They don't have to, you say, hey, get back to us in a week or something like that. Let us go and do some study. They know the chapter and verse because there's a place in the Old Testament book of Micah where it says, oh yeah, one day there's going to be a king born in Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is 6 miles away from Jerusalem. But the experts know the answer to the question right off the top of their head. And this brings us to a point of this story that I think is really important, that the people who are farthest from God at this point in the story are the most hungry to find God in the story. And sometimes that's just the way that it works, that there's just this passion, this desire, this search, this hunger. And it leads us, sometimes to even overcome people who aren't real helpful in the process of finding that. But that's who the wise men are in this story. Man, they are in pursuit. They've made a long journey. It probably has taken them months to get there. They've been walking or on camels or whatever, it took to get them there. It took them a long time. And they're hungry. And the people who are closest to the truth of God, what we would call the Bible, they are the least motivated to do anything about it. They know all the answers. They have the knowledge. They have the information, but they're not about to do anything with it. Wouldn't you think that if you were one of the religious leaders and somebody shows up with a question about one of the great promises that's in the Bible, that one day God is going to show up and the Messiah is going to come, and it's only 6 miles away, don't you think that you would take just the initiative to go check that out? But they don't. And I don't know, this is a little bit of a warning to somebody like me. I've been in a relationship with God for a long time, and I know the story, and I know the facts. But I think ultimately, as good as information is, if it doesn't lead us closer to God or to pursue Him all the more or to get more passionate about the things of God, what good is it really? And in this story, the people who knew the most, they didn't do anything with it. And so I think, one of the challenges for me is, with what I know about this story and about the heart of God coming to our rescue, what am I going to do with that? And maybe you've been walking with Him for a long time too. And I think some of the experts in the law who had all the information, all the knowledge, can be a challenge to us. What are we going to do? What are we going to do with that? And maybe even are we going to let God work in our own hearts and lives to continue to mold us into the image of Jesus? Or is it just kind of old news and just so familiar to us that, oh yeah, the answer to that question, but it doesn't really move us in any way. So there are people far from God, they're hungry. People who know all the answers, they're not hungry. They're just kind of complacent. And then there's also Herod, the guy who wants the information, but he doesn't want it for the right reasons. He wants it so that he can eliminate any threat to him. And I think there's also a place that we can be in this story where as we find out about truth about God, it can seem like a little bit of a threat to us. And I think Herod helps us to understand, that Jesus is ultimately going to be the king over us, or he's going to be a rival for us. And Herod kind of sees him as a rival. And he gets two things right, though, in this story. And, there's a lot he gets wrong. And ultimately, his motives are all mixed up. But here's what he tells those wise men who have made this long journey. Make a careful search for the child. And I think that's good advice to all of us, no matter who we are on this Christmas day. Make a careful search for this child. You're checking it out. Find out who Jesus is. You've been walking with him for a long time. What is it that he has for you? What is the work that he wants to do in your heart and life? How does he want to get you more engaged in the things that he is doing? Make a careful search for this child. And also, he invites them, to find out where Jesus is and to continue to make that journey. And I think there's an invitation for us to do that. So the wise men leave Herod and his experts, and they go to Bethlehem, and they find where Jesus is, and Mary and Joseph as well. And they bring those very famous gifts that we talk about, and sometimes a lot is made out of that. Gold is often a gift for a king. Frankincense is something used in worship and kind of alludes to Jesus being our great high priest. And then myrrh is used for the embalming process, very precious sort of thing. And sometimes people say, well, he's our king, Jesus our king, he's our high priest, and he also predicts his death. I don't think the wise men knew that when they were on that journey. They just showed up and they gave the best that they had. And so they gave these gifts. And I think on this Christmas day, what is it God's looking for us, from us, is that we would just give him the best that we have. For those of you that were parents, when your kids were young, it's kind of, we would get Christmas ready for our kids and they would be so excited about the gifts they were going to get. And I don't know if you ever had that moment where your kids were old enough to actually make a gift. Sometimes it happened in school. Sometimes they even did it on their own. And they would get so excited about the gift that they had for you. And they were almost like shaking and so excited for you to look at it. And most of the time when you open those gifts, they were not really all that great in the scheme of things. They weren't worth a lot. But if you know what that moment is like, it just wrecked you, the parent, because you think, wow, they took the time to make that and was really special and important to you. We've kept a lot of those gifts over the years. Many of them we've put on a Christmas tree that's dedicated just to what our kids made for us over the years. And those things are pretty special. It was the best that they had at that moment. And so what's the best that we can do? And maybe our faith is just a little bit. Here are wise men. They took a little bit of light that they had and they made this journey to find Jesus over many miles, over a lot of time. And they gave him the best that they had. So here's the idea I want to leave with you, right? I asked the question, you ever taken a journey that was worth it? You ever taken a journey that wasn't worth it? The journey to Jesus is worth it. And the journey with Jesus is worth it. And so this Christmas, if you're wondering, is there anything for me here? Or you're not sure what this is all about? Find out about Jesus. And I'm telling you, it's not about Washington Heights Church, not about any church. It is about the Jesus of the Bible. And make a careful search for that child. Find out who he is. See the things that he did. Read the words that he said. And I think you'll discover that the journey to the Jesus of the Bible is worth it. I also think that there are some people you're watching today, and it's been a hard year, or you're in a hard season right now, and you wonder, is it really worth it? Is it worth continuing to follow Jesus when it seems like it doesn't alleviate some of the hard things that happen? And over this year, I've talked to a lot of people who have found this to be a hard year, a hard season. And I just want to encourage you, it's worth it. It's worth it to continue with Jesus, the God who has promised never to leave us or forsake us. He didn't promise us that it would be problem-free, but he promised us that he would be with him. He would be with us, and that we could be with him, regardless of the season in which we find ourselves. And there's also a community called the church that he created, a new kind of community where we would walk through life together. And so I just want to encourage you that the journey is worth it. And if you've been walking with Jesus for a long time, I would just encourage you to see what God has for you in this next year. And let's not take it for granted. Let's not take God's love, Jesus' sacrifice, his coming to this earth as our promised Messiah. We may know that. But so what? What does it mean? And how is it that Jesus is being formed in our hearts? And one time, the Apostle Paul was writing to some people he cared about, and he talked about how Christ was being formed in their hearts. And so what is it that God has for us? In this side of heaven, we're never done growing. We're never done discovering all that God is and all that we can be a part of that he's doing. And so here's a thought I want to leave you with on this Christmas Sunday. Jesus is worth the journey wherever you might be. Have a great Christmas. We'll see you soon. Thanks for being with us today.